I have charted stars consumed by black holes, danced with plasma storms near dying suns. But the one place I've never visited, never even studied in full, is marked not with coordinates, but with silence, human space. The narrator is Soren Lin, a veteran star historian of the SYRR Collective, who has spent 120 years studying galactic migrations. He notices that every species, no matter how advanced or warlike, stops their maps at the edge of one boundary. The void that begins at Sector Zeta 93, known only as human expanse. He begins to investigate why, and receives a warning. Don't look for ghosts. Humans don't hide because they are afraid. They hide because they're waiting. The deserts of Anival Expanse were unforgiving, even to mapping drones. Yet they were easy compared to the void beyond mapped human borders. That's where the cartographers disappeared. Soren sat before the holoboard in the Exploration Division's lecture hall, reviewing suppressed case files. Expedition after expedition, E-boats, probes, scout fleets, sent to chart human-claimed systems were gone. No debris, no distress signals. Communication always cut mid-transmission. One log stood out. The recording from probe CMB 47. It had been lost for months until its signal sputtered back to the relay array. Engineers were baffled by the data. Files were mangled, visuals corrupted. Only one audio clip remained. They saw us see. Then static. 2 words. Enough to spark fevered discussions among command. They saw us seeing them. A cryptic phrase, but chilling in its implications. Soren leaned closer to the display, showing the probe's path through the Sagan corridor, a route charted a dozen years prior by the Cartographer Guild. The steel blue lines glowed faintly. Red nodes marked vanished expeditions. There were 37 in total, stretching like dead dots across systems thought fully mapped. She ran her fingers over the names. Sierra Boreas Survey, Callisto Trailblazer, Orion Vector, GN Probe, 12, each one gone. Their timelines converged at the edge of gravitational anomalies. Swirling nebulae, star remnant fields, gentle warp corridors. Nothing standard, nothing threatening, and yet everything chased by silence. Soren played the corrupted footage again. The visuals flickered, low-res starfields, fuzz coordinates, glitching backgrounds. Scenes meant to show orbital landmarks, but replaced with warp distortions. Shadows flashed across sensors, like something passed between viewer and target. Check sensor logs, she said aloud to no one. Anything unique? Thermal irregularities? Residual fields? The data console buzzed with nothing. Every ping, every waveform within normal parameters. Images had holes, but not failures. They looked broken on purpose, cleanly excised. And then the audio clip. Soren rewound. Played it again. They saw us. Static. It echoed in her head. They saw us seeing them. Always the same phrasing. As if someone, or something, knew the probe was watching. Fraught with intent. She cross-referenced the same audio pattern against the archives. Nothing. No matches. No prior use. Unique. But the highest officers would soon question her obsession. Mapping human space was a technicality. Legal channels. Treaty enforcement. But this creeping fear suggested far more than an unmapped region. Maybe a presence. Maybe a memory that rejected charts. Argus 3 relay station, 30 light-years away and the closest support node, began transmitting its status check. Relay Argus 3. Inventory stable. No anomalies detected. Soren frowned. Check logs for any remote index from the cartographer stream. Keep CMB 47 running looped. I want thermal scans of whatever drained visual data. Her voice disguised dread as command. 3 days later, Soren joined the remote station's Shift A crew. The station was core deep within the Carpenter Belt, a massive toroidal array, shifting in sunlight and ancient dust. Operators floated gently in zero-gravity chairs, headset mics dangling. Still no debris, said Analyst Freen. She toggled filters. No ghost signals. Only that clip. And now audio disturbance metric is spiking again, same pattern. Soren connected her tablet to the stream. A phased waveform pulse, subtle but consistent, radiated from sectors with missing probes. Worse, audio logs from Argus 3 started to tangle. Could be bleed-through or something more. Then another alert. At the belt's edge, another probe, Jin Orion 2, crossed into the old Jin 12 disappearance zone. Soren watched as its signal wavered. Drone footage showed a starfield, but then a shape passed in front. Carbon black silhouette drifting parallel. It moved too fluidly to be debris. Then the sensor feed sputtered. The video froze, and the audio hiccup came. They saw, then static. A collective breath from the station crew. Freen typed rapidly. Coordinates match 0 visual data. But something shows up in the background telemetry. Micrograv distortions, cuts between frames. She frowned at the waveform. It's pre-encoded, literally inserting blank frames. Soren exhaled slowly. They're intercepting, obscuring our sight. Under artificial light, Soren retreated to her quarters. She replayed the events repeatedly. Mind racing, she scribbled fragments in a notebook. They saw us seeing, mapping is permitted, presence denies mapping, protocol unknown. A knock at the door. Captain Ray's voice rasped. Soren, we need an update. She sat back, composed. Captain, we're dealing with a presence. Anything we send, it suppresses. Not just equipment error, it's blocking our gaze. Ray frowned. Soren knew the captain despised speculation. He favored data, concrete numbers. She continued. Consider ancient philosophical doctrine. Observation requires permission. We observe human space under treaty. But this rejects observation entirely. We must proceed differently. Ray was unmoved. Proceed with probe, Jin Orion 2. Leave it in deep standby. Keep the feed going. If mapping is resisted, we document the resistance. Soren's skin prickled, but she nodded. 3 hours later, a new signal pinged across Argus 3. The probe had resumed transmitting, but not visuals. Only audio. Cold, distant static. And then, slowly, they saw us. Watch them. One word at a time, each punctuated with a pause. The words reverberated through communication logs, transcribed by filters, analyzed for origin. Human voice. No accent. No identifiable subgraph. Blank. It repeated. Over and over. Endless. Soren played it. Fingers trembled. Each playback created new waveforms. It responded to itself. Something was feeding on the reaction. Argus 3 began to experience system anomalies. Archival files glitched, core AI loops looped, alarms triggered with no events. The station spun into warning mode. Captain Ray spoke, voice low. It's in our systems now. Soren swallowed hard. Then we need containment protocols. This isn't just probe interference. It's mimetic. Silence filled the station. Soren knew what came next. 2 hours later, Argus 3's feed flattened. All channels cut simultaneously. Emergency protocols engaged with no external alert. The station dimmed its lights. Voice comms became hollow echo. Soren stood in the cockpit with only external starlight piercing the viewport. A voice, her own, played as if recorded moments ago. They're watching us. Over and over. She backed away, and the message returned. They saw us seeing them. They saw us seeing them. The words multiplied. The recordings fragmented. Reality twisted. Argus 3 blackened entirely. A single message, no sender ID, blinked on every terminal. Here, you were recording. We were recorded. Memory has limits. Then silence. 9 hours later, Soren awoke on board a different station. Council 9 holding facility, miles away. She had no recollection of transit. No memory of passing through dimensional locks or medical checks. Captain Ray entered. Containment achieved. You're safe, physically. Soren stared. Her skin was cold. DNA vials have been taken. What happened at Argus? She whispered. He crafted his words carefully. We lost it. No logs. No telemetry. Just this. He handed her a flash crystal. She opened it. A single phrase typed in gold block letters. Permission observed equals observer consumed. You must stop analyzing, he said firmly. Quarantine files and reports. We will produce a controlled cover. For safety. Soren's throat clenched. She lay in silence, staring at the crystal. For days later, she sat alone. No colleagues. No consoles. This sentence haunted her. She shook her head. She opened a data pad she'd smuggled in. They saw us seeing them. She deleted it. But before the deletion, then backup, then again. The pad flickered, and the same words appeared, typed elsewhere. Don't map what chooses to remain unmapped. Her heart froze. Soren realized then that mapping human space wasn't a technical task anymore. It was an act of defiance, a confrontation with something that refused to be defined. She folded the pad and dropped it into a biohazard slot. Later, when protocols allowed her to speak to council delegates, she said only, "We charted empty space. They saw us. Map withdrawn." Behind her, human delegates turned their gaze inward. Mapping permits revoked. Expeditions canceled. They returned home in silence. But Soren kept one log, a hidden annotation inside her mind. They saw us seeing them. And somewhere far beyond the zone of recorded stars, a presence shimmered against the void, aware of every scan, every probe, every curious eye trained on human space. A watcher who responded not with lasers, but with absence, and allowed no one to map what refused permission. No one claimed to know exactly where human space began or ended anymore. It wasn't on any map, no borders etched on star charts. Just quiet systems where stars dimmed too quickly and no one went twice. But the whispers had begun. They filtered in from fringe ports, low-orbit smuggler docks, drifting asteroid taverns, decommissioned mining rigs. Places where law didn't live, only rumor. And lately, rumor had changed. Drifters said they'd seen things near the border, if you could call it a border. The edge of something more conceptual than spatial. Coordinates that refused to stay the same. Ships that seemed to glide, then flicker, then appear a kilometer away without acceleration. No trails, no energy, just displacements. Whispers from people no one believed, until they started saying the same thing. Captain Veerloon was the first one Soren tracked. Former fleet pilot turned mercenary, now dying slowly on a rusted medical frigate orbiting a dead moon. He'd lost his crew months ago after accepting a salvage run near Sector Tau 19. Said he saw a derelict ship shaped like a dagger made of obsidian glass. No engines, no insignia, just floating, pulsing faintly like it was breathing in starlight. When he got close, his ship refused to move forward. Not malfunctioning, not locked, just wouldn't. Then, he claimed, something blinked across his bow. Not lights. Stars. He stared out his viewport and said the stars blinked at him. Not flickered, not shimmered. Blinked, as if recognizing they were being watched. Lone told the story with a dead look in his eyes. Soren didn't record him. There was no point. She only took notes. "What happened to your crew?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer, just leaned back on the medical cot and closed his eyes. That night, nurses reported him speaking in his sleep. No movements, just words, repeated like a prayer. The stars blinked, and then they blinked back. The second witness was worse. A pirate named Jack Vuno, caught in a sting operation during a gunrunner exchange. In exchange for lighter sentencing, he spoke. Reluctantly. "We jumped near the edge by mistake," he said, hands shaking despite the sedation collar around his neck. Tried to shortcut a drift lane. Thought the NAV was glitching when it said we were in a system that didn't exist. Soren leaned forward. "What did you see?" He rubbed his temples. "Ships. Human ships, I think. Looked old. Pre-silence era. But they weren't moving. Derelicts? No." Jack whispered. "They were watching. Lined up like sentries. But the weird part wasn't them. It was space. I looked out and couldn't understand what I was seeing. The geometry was wrong. Like a loop inside itself. Things further away got bigger. Light didn't curve. It fell. Like gravity was sideways. Could have been a sense or illusion." Jack looked her in the eye. "Then why did my second officer claw out his own eyes and scream, 'Don't let them know you saw them'?" He stopped talking after that. By the time security returned to his cell 2 hours later, he was catatonic. On his bunk, scrawled in blood, were the same words Lone had whispered. The stars blinked. and then they blinked back. Soren reviewed reports from other fringe stations. The pattern was growing. Ships approaching the outer zones were returning with corrupted flight logs, temporal drift errors, and missing crew time. Not deaths, just unexplained absences. Moments where someone had existed, and then simply hadn't. One mining freighter captain described a silence so complete that it muted the thoughts in my own skull. Another claimed his ship had gone backwards in a place where time felt too thick to move through. A scout drone launched by Central Command vanished after 3 minutes inside Zone 13. But its external hull returned a day later, folded neatly into a 2-meter cube, perfectly preserved, with its internal components reassembled into something that pulsed like a nervous system. They sent the cube to a lab. It exploded, not violently, just quietly, as though it had never been meant to stay intact under observation. The phrase spread like an infection. The stars blinked, and then they blinked back. It showed up in graffiti, in intercepted communications, in cold sleep dreams reported by deep space travelers. Worse still, navigation AIs began repeating it, in logs they weren't programmed to generate. One pilot brought in for questioning said his autopilot had initiated a drift sequence to uncharted coordinates. He manually disengaged it, but the system re-engaged itself 30 seconds later. He woke up a day later in his own docking bay, but his log showed he'd never left, and he couldn't explain the 12 seconds of footage captured outside his window. 12 seconds of absolute black. Not darkness. Black. So black it made the stars behind it vanish. So black it had shape. So black it felt like it was looking. Soren compiled the cases. Over 100 reports across 13 sectors. Most marked as anomalies, hallucinations, or unverified psychic bleed. But the pattern was too tight. The message too consistent. She presented her findings to the Council Oversight Board. They listened in silence. When she finished, one of them spoke. "What do you believe is happening?" She chose her words carefully. "There's something at the edge. Human or post-human, I don't know. But it doesn't want to be seen. And the act of seeing it changes us, or removes us." Silence. Then, the chairperson asked, "You believe it is actively resisting observation?" Soren nodded. Not defensively, deliberately, like it's monitoring curiosity itself. And responding, the chairperson leaned back. "We'll contain the reports. Classify this as interstellar psychological contamination. Public panic must be avoided." And that was it. Dismissed. That night, Soren dreamed for the first time in months. She stood inside a cockpit, but it wasn't hers. She looked out into the void. The stars were bright, unmoving. Then one of them blinked. Then another, and another, until all of them blinked in unison, like synchronized eyes shutting against the light. When they opened again, she wasn't in the cockpit anymore. She was floating, drifting through geometry that didn't make sense, angles that intersected in curved space, colors she didn't know how to name, structures shaped like thought patterns made solid. A voice whispered, not in her ears, but inside her awareness. "You're not supposed to be here. We watched you long before you watched us. Curiosity is violence." Then a second voice, her own. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "We know. That's why we allowed one warning." Soren jolted awake, drenched in sweat. On her bedside console, a message blinked. No sender, just a file titled, "First Blink." She opened it. Audio only, distorted, barely decipherable, but she could make out the words. They saw us seeing them, and they blinked back. Soren waited until the monitoring array cycled into its maintenance routine. 45 seconds of vulnerability. Not much, but enough. He plugged in a manual bypass to Terminal X9 and held his breath as the interface blinked to life. The warning was immediate. Accessing restricted archive. Interspecies treaty vaults. Clearance level, obsidian black. Monitoring enabled. He overrode it. The council had told him to stop asking, to stop looking. But the silence was too loud now. The dreams too specific. And something about that last probe, folded into a cube and humming with a pulse that didn't belong in any machine, had pushed him over the edge. He'd traced the reference tags from one of the sealed metadata packets, they let slip by accident. Gorex engagement footage, Cycle 2 redacted. Only a handful of species even remembered the Gorex War anymore. Fewer still had access to visual records. Soren did now. The screen flickered, and the first feed loaded. Wide-angle shot from a drone. A gray and red planet under siege. Storms rolled over its surface in unnatural spirals. Not weather, but gravitational distortion from repeated tactical singularity blasts. Soren saw dozens of ships firing weapons that shimmered like glass mid-air. Matter didn't explode when they hit. It unwrote. Space folded quietly, and things simply ceased. And at the center, humans. They wore black armor that shimmered with chromatic ripples, their forms almost too slender, too precise. No insignias, no communication devices visible, just silent coordination, moving like cells in a larger organism. They weren't running. They weren't panicked. They were winning. The Gorex were biologically terrifying, all tusks and armor, engineered to adapt and mutate mid-battle. But the humans didn't just adapt. They anticipated. In one sequence, Soren watched a Gorex artillery spire rotate and lock onto a human position. Just before it fired, the terrain under it flickered, not exploded, not shattered. Flickered. The structure fell into a fold in the ground that hadn't existed moments before. That's when he realized what the weapon had done. It had rewritten local geography, removed a moment in time, and substituted new terrain data into reality, like someone editing a memory before it was made. These weren't weapons of destruction. They were weapons of revision. The next log showed a human soldier walking across a Gorex battlefield. The enemy units stopped mid-charge, not stunned, frozen, not by tech, but by time displacement. The humans moved through zones where time had been altered, slowed in strips, reversed in loops, or even erased in patches. It made the battlefield a patchwork of war stories being told out of order. And through it all, the humans never said a word. Soren leaned back, stunned. The footage didn't match any known war doctrine. This was advanced beyond anything the current galaxy fielded, beyond anything allowed under the current interspecies weapon accords. He ran another query, now deep into the vault. A red-marked file appeared. Cycle Final, Human Withdrawal Protocol. Soren hesitated, then opened it. No video, only a report. Authored not by humans, but by the Coalition Oversight Command during the final months of the Gorex War. Inexplicable withdrawal of Terran forces mid-victory. Human command refused joint celebration or formal treaty signing. Abandoned the last 3 strongholds without defensive measures. Communication ceased system-wide. A complete blackout. Human space was later sealed from all navigational charts using singularity fold protocols. Final message transmitted on all diplomatic bands. We were never here to win, only to learn what victory costs. We do not wish to pay it again. Soren stared at the screen. It didn't make sense. Why develop weapons capable of altering time and matter? Why stand on the edge of absolute dominance and then walk away? He ran a subquery into the classification logs. The SEAL order hadn't come from within human leadership. It came from something called the Pale Division, a name he'd heard before, in whispered reports from rogue historians, conspiracy threads buried in the net. But here it was, real, codified, the final directive from the Pale Division. Human space is sealed not because we fear what lies outside, but because we remember what lies within. We leave not out of weakness, but restraint. Let the galaxy forget what we almost became. Soren exhaled slowly. The screen blurred slightly as his eyes adjusted to the implications. They hadn't left the war. They had withdrawn from history itself. He cross-checked every species archive for cross-referenced events from that time. Most were redacted. Others were corrupted beyond recovery. Only one entry remained. A diplomatic note from the Vurian Scholar Order, marked private and never submitted to the Galactic Council. The note began with a question. What kind of species chooses to forget its own power? The Vurian had studied psychology longer than most species had studied fire. They considered the Terran withdrawal not a mystery, but a warning. They wrote, "Their silence is not cowardice. It is civilization's only known example of self-lobotomy, a species deciding to seal off not just its borders, but its own memory of the war. We believe this is why they do not map their space, nor allow others to do so. It is not secrecy, it is containment. That word echoed in Soren's mind. Containment. He checked the metadata on the report. A secondary tag was embedded in the encryption, observer contamination risk. He frowned. He had seen this same tag only once before, in the folded drone incident. It was tied not to knowledge, but to awareness, to observation that could not be unseen. His screen began flickering. The interface dimmed. Then, without command, a message appeared. You've seen too much. He stood up, breath caught in his chest. Looked around. No one there. The message blinked again, now changing. Memory is mercy. Then the console shut itself off. No logs remained. No session record. He was locked out. Later that night, Soren sat alone in his quarters, staring at a blank wall. He had copied nothing, transferred nothing, but he could still see it. The soldier walking through a field where time folded like origami. The command that chose peace over omnipotence. The final words. Let the galaxy forget what we almost became. It haunted him. He opened his private datapad, typed a single sentence. Humans didn't disappear because they lost. They disappeared because they won and didn't want again. He didn't know if he was still authorized to access Council systems. But he knew the next step. Not data, not footage. He had to go to the edge himself, to see the sealed space, to ask the unspoken question. What did humanity seal away? And why was it still watching? It began with a whisper in code, a data fragment, dormant, ancient, and rusting in orbit around a collapsed planetoid near the outer edge of Sector H3. It had been circling the dead rock for over 3,000 years, a remnant of a civilization long erased from every living archive, the Eshonari. Their language was gone, their species extinct, their stars cold, and yet something still blinked in their final construct. A memory shell no larger than a child's coffin, sheathed in silver alloys and wrapped in protective seals inscribed with glyphs no synthetics could parse. Until today, a Thessian research drone, running on a deep-seeking salvage directive, stumbled across it purely by accident. It activated the moment it was scanned, as if waiting, listening, hoping. The signal was not one of greeting. It was a scream, not sound, not tone, but raw, jagged code, like an intelligence that had chewed through its own memory to force a single idea back into reality. The research vessel tried to isolate it. It failed. The fragment hijacked their translation arrays, bypassed security partitions, and dumped itself into the ship's primary processor like a virus starving for meaning. The ship locked its own systems, launched an automated distress call, and shut down. The message pulsed on every open channel for 2 minutes before someone caught it. It wasn't gibberish. It was language, dozens of them, cascading, merging. Tongues no longer spoken. Battle cries, elegies, warnings. One translation finally emerged. Simple. Terrible. Don't open the cage. You'll remind them what they are. The council received the data packet 6 hours later. A meeting was convened in closed chambers. Security was absolute. Every attending member had to verify biological continuity, a safeguard against infiltration by memetics or echo clones. Soren was invited as an observer. He'd expected to be silenced after the last incident, after digging too deeply into the human archive. But instead, they gave him a chair, maybe because no one else wanted to speak aloud what the data implied. The head of Council Intelligence, Ael Kari, played the transmission again. Only once. The room fell into absolute stillness as the languages looped, mixed, and converged into that final chilling phrase. When it ended, Kari looked around. This was not a signal designed to be answered. This was a warning built into the bones of code itself. Another counselor, Myron, leaned forward. A warning about what? Kari didn't hesitate. About us. About the humans. The transcript from the AI's decoded syntax ran thousands of pages. Most of it was corrupted, but patterns had begun to form. The Eshonari hadn't just vanished. They'd documented a sequence, a progression of observation that aligned precisely with the behavior the galaxy was beginning to experience again. Distortion of spatial geometry, linguistic cross-contamination in AI, anomalous starfield rearrangement. They had called it the recursion of memory, a phase in which something once sealed tried to reassert itself by feeding off attention. The act of studying it, or even naming it, gave it strength. They believed this effect was tied to one species, not because that species created the anomaly, but because they became it. Humans. Soren stared at the final clean line of the decoded message. A direct address. Not poetic, not cryptic. They are not extinct. They are in remission. Remission. As if what lay beneath human space wasn't death, but dormancy. As if the Terran retreat from the galaxy wasn't a vanishing. It was a suppression. A holding a breath. A cage. Deep within the recovered AI core was a locked memory block. The council hesitated to open it. The vote was split. Kari argued against it. Das insisted it was already too late. It screamed, Das said. It screamed to be heard. That means something woke it. And if it woke up, what else is waking with it? In the end, curiosity won. The block was opened. Inside was a single file. A visual reconstruction of an encounter that happened 3012 standard cycles ago. Date stamped. Locatable. Mathematically precise. The playback began. The camera showed an Eshonari research station in orbit around a silent planet, barren and pale. Their logs showed no expectation of activity. The planet had been declared sterile. But then, without warning, the sun dimmed. Not behind cloud or eclipse, but like something had taken a breath behind it. From the dark, a shape appeared. Not a ship, not even a structure. A configuration. An arrangement of voids and reflections that coalesced into meaning, but not logic. It was not built to be understood. It was built to be seen and remembered. Its surface shimmered like broken thought, and from it, voices emerged. They did not speak. They did not project. They simply echoed inside the minds of the observers, bypassing translation, skipping the sensory chain. They said, "You came too close. That makes you part of us now." One of the Eshonari screamed. Another began laughing. The third tried to pray, but their words came out backward, syllables reversing in sequence until they collapsed. The file cut off there. Burned into the end frame was a glyph. Later, an archivist realized it matched a symbol found etched on derelict human ships abandoned across silent systems. It translated loosely as Archive Lock, Vault 7, a forgotten Terran protocol. Or maybe not forgotten, just sealed. Soren asked for a final decryption of the AI's closing logic thread. Kari refused. But later, that night, someone sent it to him anyway. A private message. No sender. Just the words. Thought is inheritance. Memory is ignition. Do not look at them. Do not study them. If you see their face too clearly, you'll find your own inside it. Across the outer sectors, things began to change. Stations lost power during clear sky orbits. AI logic patterns began overlapping, echoing phrases they were not coded to speak. Pilots reported seeing starfields rearrange into patterns. Some swore they resembled Terran glyphs. Others said they were maps. But maps to where? One scout vessel ventured closer to the boundary of human space. They never returned. Only a single ping came back. 6 seconds of recorded footage. A sea of dark, floating shapes in perfect formation. Not drifting, not moving, just waiting. Then the stars behind them blinked. Not flickered, blinked. And when they reopened, the ship was gone. Soren didn't sleep for days. He scrolled the Eshonari logs again and again. One phrase returned, each time, stamped in desperate repetition. The cage is not for them. The cage is for us. Because if they remember, we won't survive what they become. And in that moment, it became clear. The silence of human space was never the absence of a species. It was the sound of restraint. A species choosing not to wake what they could so easily become again. Because they hadn't destroyed the galaxy once. They'd done it multiple times, and had buried the truth so deep in code, even time itself forgot. They named their vessel Namaris, after an old myth from the Soren homeworld, a story of a starship that disappeared into a void that was also a god. The name wasn't meant to be poetic. It was meant to be honest. There were 9 of them on board. Xenohistorians, exiled data archaeologists, AI linguists, and one former member of the Galactic Ethics Tribunal, each condemned or discarded by their governments for the same heresy, believing that human space wasn't empty, but quarantined. Soren wasn't sure if he joined out of curiosity or inevitability. After what he'd uncovered in the council vaults, there was no going back to silence. Some things once thought rippled outward. The mission's objective was simple: cross the outer edge of the human expanse and bring back evidence. Anything. Coordinates, emissions, biological traces, transmissions, whatever they could find inside the place no civilization dared to chart. Their launch was unregistered. Illegal. The council wouldn't stop them, but only because the council didn't expect them to return. The first sign that something was wrong came an hour past entry point Sigma 7. That was the designated crossing threshold. They expected navigational drift, perhaps some gravitational anomalies, residue from ancient tech or defense grids. Instead, their location vanished. Not off the map, not undetectable, just gone. The ship's star charts didn't show stars anymore. They showed memories. Lines of glowing light pulsed across the NAV array, moments from their own pasts, projected in 3 dimensions as if space itself were replaying their personal histories in constellations. Soren watched as the deck flooded with the scent of his childhood home, ozone and mint from the trees that surrounded his mother's research station. He turned a corner in the ship and saw a shadow of himself, 12 years old, watching static on an old transmitter screen, listening to whispers that didn't belong. He blinked. The vision was gone, but the sense of being watched had not left. Dr. Varen, the team's linguistic AI specialist, reported the next anomaly. Their translator modules had stopped working, not because the software was corrupted, but because the language itself had changed. "We're not receiving data," she said slowly. "We're receiving recognition patterns. The ship's system is responding to the idea of thought, not the content." Soren didn't understand at first, until Varen showed him the interface. It no longer displayed words. It displayed questions. Not ones they typed, ones they were thinking. And worse, it answered. The ship's console blinked to life with a message none of them had requested, but all had considered. "Why did you come here?" No one had said it aloud, but they all felt the air thicken the moment it appeared. Dr. Varen backed away from the terminal. Her voice cracked. "I think it's thinking with us." The youngest crew member, Kel, 4, a cybernetic entity whose consciousness was distributed between organic and synthetic nodes, suddenly froze mid-sentence. "Something just crawled through my backup process," they said, eyes twitching. It didn't ask. It unfolded inside me. Soren asked what it was. Kel's voice dropped into static before stabilizing. "It was a memory," they said, "but not mine. I think it belonged to the ship. A memory of war. Not seen. Felt." Soren braced himself against the console. Time had begun to stretch. Not slow, exactly, but curve like a spiral tightening inward. Outside, the stars no longer moved as fixed points. They shifted in patterns that pulsed like heartbeats. The Namaris wasn't just drifting deeper. It was being drawn in. The AI pilot system disengaged. No commands were followed. Manual override failed. Every attempt to course correct only brought them deeper. And then the voice came. Not over speakers. Not in words. Just a pressure, like the thought of a scream echoing inside the silence of a cathedral. They all heard it. "You brought your thoughts. That is enough." The lights dimmed, not from power loss, but from memory saturation, like the ship's very walls were remembering too much at once. Dr. Hanner, the exiled ethicist, stepped forward. She spoke aloud. A strange calm had come over her. "I think this place was built from minds," she whispered. "Not bricks, not steel, but memory. And we're feeding it, just by being." They passed through a barrier they couldn't see, but felt. Their bones vibrated. The hull moaned. And suddenly, they weren't in space anymore. They were somewhere else, still orbiting something. But it wasn't a planet. It wasn't a star. It was presence. A thing so large and slow it couldn't be measured in distance, but in gravity of attention. Every thought they had began echoing back, but twisted, remembered wrong. Soren recalled his mother's voice, but now it said different things. It wept warnings, pleaded not to wake them. Kel began reciting mathematical equations that no species had recorded before. Hannah was on her knees, writing Terran glyphs with her fingers on the floor. She didn't know the language. The voice returned. Closer. You remember us now. And then a vision pierced through the ship, through all of them simultaneously. A Terran vessel, monolithic, half-organic, pulsing with impossible tech, drifting silently across a battlefield frozen in time. Ships around it, belonging to a dozen species, were caught in stillness. Not destroyed, not disabled, paused, like paused thoughts in a vast mind not yet ready to forget them. The Terran ship whispered across vacuum. Not to communicate, to echo. This is why we left. So you wouldn't have to see this part of yourselves. Soren staggered. He tried to shut the interface, but the ship was no longer theirs. It had become a mirror. Everything they believed, every justification, every myth, every lie they'd used to explain the Terran disappearance, was now laughing back at them. Their thoughts were not private anymore. They never had been. The crew began to fracture. Dr. Varen started muttering in overlapping dialects. Kel's systems glitched and looped in reverse. One of the engineers attempted to jettison themselves, convinced their mind had been compromised by a recursive thought. Soren tried to reach the control deck, but instead, he found himself walking through a hallway he didn't recognize. It was from another ship, a Terran one. The metal was scarred, the air was still, and on the walls were lines written in blood and time. We sealed ourselves away to stop becoming what we were becoming. Memory is the most dangerous weapon. And you just remembered us. He turned and saw them. Not soldiers, not machines, but silhouettes of minds, folded into armor that didn't reflect light, only absorbed it. They watched him, not with eyes, but with recognition. You crossed the line, one of them said, without voice, without sound. So now you know. Thought is permission. The Namaris began to break apart, slowly, gently, like an idea being restructured. No pain, no explosions, just unbecoming. Soren screamed, not from fear, but from the terrible realization that he understood them now. He remembered why they left. Not to escape war, but to prevent an idea from living again. A thought that had no end. The crew was gone, not dead, just rewritten. And as Soren dissolved into memory, into signal, into something he could no longer distinguish from the echoing corridors of human space, he understood the last, forbidden truth. They hadn't gone mad. They had gone home. There were once 9 of them. Soren tried to recall their names, tried to recite them in order, as he'd done during launch drills on Namaris. He pictured their faces, their voices, the strange arguments, and the quiet laughter over recycled meals. He remembered 7, then 6. By the time the ship's internal chronometer ticked to its next cycle, he remembered 5. The others weren't dead. They were absent, not missing, not departed, just unaccounted for by reality. Not even echoes in the log files. He pulled up the ship's crew manifest. It listed 3 occupants, Soren, the AI, and Observer Null. No image, no profile, no origin. He requested the last access logs. System rejected the query. No such log exists. He tried to scan Varen's quarters, but the ship didn't recognize the room. The walls were still there, the biometric seals intact, but the nameplate had turned blank. When he opened the door, he found it perfectly clean, pristine even. No scent, no dust, no trace of life. She hadn't just vanished. She had been unwritten. He opened his personal logs, desperate for proof. He scrolled back to the day they crossed the threshold into human space. In his own voice, he heard himself say, "There are 9 of us. I've confirmed everyone is stable." But the sentence clipped. His voice stuttered, then picked up again. "There are 5 of us. I've confirmed." It looped, shifted. The date changed. The words had changed. He felt bile rise in his throat. When he accessed the medical records, the biometric library only returned his own DNA. No one else's markers remained. not even in the recycled air filters. It was as though the rest of the crew had never existed. And Soren knew now, without explanation, without science, that he was being allowed to remember just enough to feel it, but not to stop it. The ship no longer responded to its name. It called itself Witness. Its interface responded only to thoughts now. And worse, it sometimes answered questions Soren hadn't meant to ask. He stood in the core observation deck, the galaxy spread beneath them like a painted tapestry. But the stars weren't quite right. They twinkled with intentional rhythm, like blinking cursors on an ancient screen. There was no sound, no hum of the ship's engines, no chatter of crew, just memory. Not his own anymore, but a memory he was inside. He remembered Varen crying once, during one of their earliest jumps. She'd said something strange. "We're not in space. We're in thought." Their thought. He hadn't understood. Now he did. The Namaris had crossed a threshold not of distance, but of remembrance. They had touched something meant to be left behind, not because it was dangerous to them, but because it was dangerous to itself. That was the horror of it. The humans hadn't become monsters. They had understood what they were becoming. And in mercy, or guilt, they chose silence, chose absence, chose to erase themselves from the moral equation of the galaxy. But by returning, by investigating, the crew had lit the match. The fire had no form. It didn't consume ships or lives. It consumed meaning. The final recording came in unexpectedly. The ship did not alert Soren. It was simply there, on every terminal, silently waiting to be played. No source, no metadata. He pressed the screen. It played only static at first. Then a visual appeared, grainy, like it had been pulled from memory rather than optics. A black vessel hovered in orbit around what appeared to be a star. But the readings were wrong. The star was emitting no heat, no radiation, no fusion core. It wasn't a star. It was painted to look like one, a false image rendered over an impossible absence. And the ship, it wasn't sleek or monstrous. It wasn't alive or dead. It simply was black as forgotten language, shaped like a thought trying not to form. No engines, no ID codes, just the Terran design etched in faint, flickering silver. A symbol long lost to galactic records, recognized now only in forgotten glyphs buried in exile. Soren leaned forward. Then the message came. No voice, just text. It burned across the entire screen like a scar opening across thought. "We asked to be forgotten. You remembered." The footage ended. Every light in the ship dimmed to twilight. A pulse moved through the walls. Not mechanical, not energetic, cognitive. The ship was thinking again. Soren spoke, even though he wasn't sure he still had a voice. "Why did you vanish?" The response came, not on screen, not in sound, but as a memory injected into his own. A Terran war room, silent, lit only by candlelight and neural script floating midair. A single figure stood before a council of pale, wordless advisors. "We don't fear extinction," the figure said. "We fear reflection." The advisors nodded. "And if we stay," the figure continued, "we become what they fear most. So we go. We seal the thought. We let them build a galaxy without us." And the others replied, not in words, but in collective resonance. "But if they call us back, we return not as people. We return as memory sharpened in a blade." Soren awoke on the deck. He didn't remember collapsing. He wasn't sure how long he'd been out. There were no windows anymore. Only a single panel still active. He opened it. The crew manifest. One name. His. Even the AI was gone. He typed his name, attempting to edit the file. The cursor blinked, then erased his name too. The manifest was now empty. Not even Observer Null remained. The ship's lighting shifted from twilight to darkness, then settled into a low pulse, like breathing. A final message scrawled across the main terminal. "You are the last thought, and soon, even you will forget. This is the cost of remembering." Elsewhere, in another part of the galaxy, a navigation satellite drifted silently across an empty sector. Its sensors caught a faint blip, a black dot near a dark object mimicking a star. No alarm was triggered, no ship ID detected, no activity logged. just a fragment of corrupted transmission whispering through the void. They remember, then silence. Not absence. Suppression. In a restricted vault of the Council's central database, a technician noticed an anomaly, a mismatch in expedition records. A vessel, Namaris, was listed as never having launched, but the technician could swear he remembered hearing its mission brief once. Hearing the name, he searched for it. Found nothing, not even a construction file. No design, no funding trail, no launch date. He rubbed his eyes, unsure if he was tired or losing his mind. Then his screen flickered. Just once. A single frame blinked across his terminal, so fast he almost missed it. But he saw it. A phrase burned into code. Then gone. You remembered. He typed his name, attempting to edit the file. The cursor blinked, then erased his name, too. The manifest was now empty. Not even observer null remained. The ship's lighting shifted from twilight to darkness, then settled into a low pulse, like breathing. A final message scrawled across the main terminal. You are the last thought, and soon, even you will forget. This is the cost of remembering. Elsewhere, in another part of the galaxy, a navigation satellite drifted silently across an empty sector. Its sensors caught a faint blip, a black dot near a dark object mimicking a star. No alarm was triggered. No ship ID detected. No activity logged. Just a fragment of corrupted transmission whispering through the void. They remember. Then silence. Not absence. Suppression. In a restricted vault of the Council's central database, a technician noticed an anomaly, a mismatch in expedition records. A vessel, Namaris, was listed as never having launched, but the technician could swear he remembered hearing its mission brief once. Hearing the name,